So spoiler, G2 lost, so they're out. And then immediately afterward, Sheep never sleeps and put out another banger. Yike and Mikyx on the trading block. So, Dom, you had a good tweet. You said, news generally travels fast. Must have been tough to play knowing your job's on the line. What do you make of this move here?
I mean, it's not even knowing your job is on the line, knowing that you most likely are losing your job. I mean, everyone knows that like Scumond is this really hyped player, and then you just saw him who he was playing obviously for BDS, and he declined the BDS offer. You know, BDS is a team that was top 3 for the entire time. And obviously they're retaining most of the good parts of their roster. They have Nuke, they have Ice still there. The only real big loss is Lebrov. They're bringing in Irrelevant. So when you're declining that roster, it's like, what do you think the options are? And everyone was rumoring him to already go to G2. So I think that the hardest part is like, unless they made some miracle like semifinals run, and like not a fraudulent semifinals run where they got some like really easy draw for some reason, like a real semifinals run where they're looking good. I mean, the roster is just doomed to break up. So I think people forget like that 2 years is a super long time to have the same roster in esports. Like this is almost unheard of to have a roster for like 2 full years. We had it with T1 obviously, which is the longest standing like roster in tier 1 play. But outside of that, it's like G2 2019, 2020, the ones that everyone remembers, like that only existed for 2 years. That was only a 2-year project. Sure, they had like so much success that it felt like very memorable. It was very impactful, but it was only a 2-year project. So if you don't get out of Swiss in 2 years, you're going to need to make changes. And I think it's the only way, because at this point, G2 just has higher ambitions. Like people like Broken Blade, people like Caps, they don't give a about winning Europe anymore. Like it's nice to win Europe, but like if you saw it, you know, their interviews after when people are like, oh, but at least you guys won Europe every time, they're like, who gives a like, like who gives a for players of their caliber? They don't even, like, these are not even the old Fnatic G2 bangers where it felt like there was another really strong team that was pushing them. These are just like layups. It's like, oh, you get to play against this fraudulent ass Fnatic that's beating themselves. Like no one feels good about that summer finals championship. No one said, oh yeah, we won summer finals where we were down 5k to 8k every single game, and then we 3-0'd them. Like no one feels good about that on that roster. And I think this is what they need to do. And if you look at how the team has progressed, I think that there are actually a lot of things to look at within the team that have improved. Like mainly Broken Blade actually looks now internationally good, whereas before he was always someone who was kind of playing the meta. You always had criticisms of, will he ever be able to play against these top tier players? And he laned versus a lot of top tier players and played well in those lanes, and he had a lot of effect in the game. It felt like this year he took a step to actually be free to be himself on the international stage, which is a huge thing, because now you have 2 players, you have Caps and Broken Blade, that both have the ability to, at their peaks, compete with the top Asian players, which is pretty much what you're looking for when you have a roster like this G2 team. So
I think it started earlier for Broken Blade too, which was at MSI last year. Because in coming into MSI last year, everybody was saying, oh, Broken Blade is going to be the weak link. And it turned out he was maybe the best player on G2 at that specific tournament. So I feel like he stepped up, like you're saying, a while ago, you know, over like a year and a half ago. And now he has this great versatility that we're seeing in the top lane. Some of the most memorable performances on G2. I mean, his Galio game was extremely good.
His
here in
Poppy game
stage.
versus Hanwha Life, they should have won that. Like he was way more impactful than Doran throughout the game. The reason they lost was other areas. The games that they played versus BLG, the Yasuo game was huge. When you think about the MSI run, the Yasuo game he played into Zeus was also huge. And those are situations where you look at those players, like those are not easy games to win. Like it is not easy to pull off Yasuo top in the main stage versus top laners that are that good. Like they are very good at spacing, and being able to pull that off, I think it just gives them a lot of versatility. I mean, when you look at why the G2 roster are underperformed, I think Yike is clearly the first person to go, because he's like good at carrying the game. Like he's good at being strong in the game, but he doesn't make good decisions throughout the game. And
his early pathing too is just wild sometimes, and like the plays that he decides to go for is just very
he just looks lost. He just looks lost. Like he's trying to he looks like he's not one of those jugglers that's playing the way that he wants to play. It's more like he's just trying to do what his team wants him to do all the time. And you know, that's just a situation where you're always on the back foot. And when you look at teams that are actually performing, it always looks like the jungler is super confident in the plays that he's making and like doing what they want to do. It's a huge reason why when I think T1 is good, you see like a different level of owner. Like when T1 is good, owner is like going places and getting shit done. And then when the play is over, he's basing, has tempo, goes on the other side of the map. Like he's like playing his own game. Like he sees the game and everyone is kind of playing around what he's capable of doing. When T1 is bad, For example, like in LCK at the end of summer, when T1 is bad, it's like owners trying to put out a lot of fires. Oh, it's like, oh shit, Faker took a really bad trade like mid with Tristana or Corki or something. Now I have to like hover mid on this wave. Okay, I hovered, you got the wave, and now I'll go back clear a camp. They don't have tempo, you're behind. And in those types of games, players like Peanut will absolutely shit on you. Like if you're playing those games where you lose tempo and you're just always on the back foot, a player like Peanut is going to completely gap you. So yeah, I mean, I just think that Yike just doesn't fit the roster. And a lot of Yike's flaws were covered up by Mikyx throughout the year. There was so many times where Yike is just off tempo. Like he is, because the thing about jungle is you need to path correctly initially so that when you path the second time, your camps are spawning in the right order so that you can hit the timings that you need to hit. It's like your mistakes become evident as a jungler like 1 minute after you actually make the mistake a lot of the time, or maybe 2 minutes after you actually make the mistake in a pro game. So there's a lot of timings where he's just in the wrong spot and Mikyx is like dishing bot lane and he's the one that's actually creating the play and he's covering the lanes that need to be covered or diving on a timer that they need to dive on or being in the right spot at the right time. So the dynamic was just really weird. It's like Mikyx is playing like the jungler, but it's like a really weak jungler because he's playing support. And then Yike is kind of just full clearing and trying to just become strong in the game and be like a carry. And that's just not what this G2 team needs. Like they have competent carries. What they need is like a better system, and that is what they're changing. They're changing the system. They're changing the jungle support.
I'm just surprised that they're getting rid of Mickey, not because I think Mickey had an excellent year, but for me, like if you are getting rid of this player who was, I think, very legitimately the MVP of LEC last year. I think he was the only candidate in 2023 for the MVP of that league. And sure, he definitely had bad times this year, but he had bad times at Worlds. Like even in their last series versus BLG, he had a pretty terrible Rel game at first, was making super questionable.
Okay, my take on the Rel game is actually that Rel is impossible to play. Like in that game.
Okay.
Like okay. I actually don't think that is like, I don't know what the point of the team comp is. I think they just got Giga out drafted that game. So a lot of people are looking at like, they're like, oh yeah, he's not landing good Rel combos because you can't land a good Rel combo because the enemy team doesn't have to ever stand on top of each other. Like they're playing a comp, right? And if you look at what the comp is, they never have to be on the same screen. You have Jax on one side flanking, like you just stay in kind of like a wing formation, and you have Jax on one side, LeBlanc on the other side. Yep. You have Alistar and Skarner, who it doesn't matter if you combo them like that. Sure, they might be together, but if you combo them, they're just gonna turn on you, and like everyone's gonna come in from the side. And Kai'Sa can stand wherever she wants because she has the ability to join a fight with ult. So I think they got just Giga out drafted that game. And it's like people see Rel and they're like, they see like the Rel Delight combo mid, and they're like, oh yeah, I mean, why didn't he do that? It's like because they're never going to be in that position because the team doesn't ever have to. They're never going to be positioned like that. So I think that a lot of these times, like you have to try to look through the lens of the player and like what he's playing into. And if you think about what happened in that game for G2, one of the biggest mistakes is that they overly tunneled on the Ori Nocturne combo. Like they drafted Ori first pick, right? Enemy team goes Skarner, Jax. Why are you drafting Nocturne? Like Nocturne is terrible into Jax. Nocturne's not good into Skarner.
No.
You already have the Orianna. It's not like Ori's only playable with Nocturne. It's almost like the other way around where like Nocturne, you really want an Ori, but you can also supplement it with like a Nico or a Kennen or just other flankers. Like you can try to create a comp around Nocturne. But Ori is a champion that is just like a solid mid laner. Yeah. It just does what it does. So in that game, they needed to pivot, but they were so addicted to this Nocturne Ori combo. So what they end up is like a Wombo combo team comp. MF, Rel, Nocturne, Orianna. They have a Wombo combo team comp against a team that doesn't ever have to group up. When you go a Wombo combo team comp, what you go that against is ball comps that want to be on top of each other. So ones with like, you know, like for example, like an enchanter and a tank where they're going to play structured front to back. They're going to be in like a pocket together all the time. So you're going to have these opportunities. But when you draft into something like this, like, I don't know how the Rel is supposed to play the game. Like, sure, he played bad, but like, he's also lane countered. He's playing versus an Alistar. So it's like a Rel versus Alistar. Like, that is a lane counter. And normally people are okay with it if the Rel provides value outside of lane, but the Rel doesn't provide value outside of lane this game as well. So it's like, how do you play that game? Like, actually, how do you play that game from support?
Yeah, to your point too. I mean, it's similar to the way that D+ was able to come back in the game in the first game versus Weibo, where they were playing LeBlanc Lee Sin, where they basically just create the pocket, and then LeBlanc has the flank and Lee Sin has the flank, and you know once Weibo walks into that, it's very very difficult to play, and they engage with the Nocturne Ori. Right? Yeah. There's never the group up that you want, and there's a form of counter engage with D+. It was like Renata ult, right? And the reason why Skarner is good into Nocturne is because once you engage in that, Skarner is one of the best kiting counter engaged champions in the game with the way he functions right now, being able to push a target out with his E or just ult multiple people who are in the engage. So it also makes Skarner the very safe pick that we're seeing now. And that's why part of the reason why we're seeing it raise so highly in terms of priority. It's because there's very little you can do about it. And dive is a huge, not only Nocturne Ori dive, but just like dive comps in general are very, very prevalent right now. And Skarner's just insanely good into all of that. But anyway,
bring it back to the move.
Bring it back to Mikyx's defense. Like I think he did actually close out this series, especially his Rakan game was very good. And I think, yes, he has struggled more this year, but I am surprised you are getting rid of a player that has this level of veterancy and who has had this high of a ceiling, right? Yep. I do find it strange. Because
if I were to contextualize it, I think that it's because Mikyx was better outside of lane this year and he was worse in lane. And like what Hansama is like a laning AD carry. So I assume what they're going to do is bring in a support like Lebrov, who is just purely better than Mikyx, like in the lane in the 2v2. And they're going to try to get a jungler. And it's very risky, obviously, because I mean, if it is Scumon, he is a rookie, but somebody who can kind of lead the team from the jungle position so that the support can be a lane first focused player.
I don't know if I think that it actually activates G2's strengths on the international stage, though, because sure, they fall behind in some of these games, but also they are one of the teams that's best at like catching throws and playing from behind. So I'm not sure it actually takes their strengths. Now, the problem with G2 is that you can't run this roster back, right? You can't do it if you have higher ambitions. But I think the issue here is that by taking a rookie jungler and putting him in, no matter how promising, and by replacing some of the kind of like crazy alchemical magic that you have on the map with Mikyx, do you actually get yourself into a better position to contest at an international stage? Is my question. Because like getting rookies right now in what is probably like the twilight of Caps's career feels like you might actually just accidentally, nuke the end of Caps's career.
Yes, but I mean, they've done this before when they moved on from Junkos to
but that's
Yike
the whole point. Is it didn't accomplish the thing that they wanted to accomplish. It
didn't. I guess it didn't, but like, what more can you ask for domestically, right? Like, I think domestically, and they got close. Like, they almost beat BLG. They almost beat the tournament favorite. That was one of the closest matches, and I think that's why this whole Swiss stage feels so rough. It's because that was their game to win. Yeah. Game 3 was their game to win.
I mean, I think that a lot of the way that they perceive things, right? Like, you have to view it through the lens of what they're actually going through day to day. Like they scrimmed, they released their scrims like they always do. Yep. And like, sure, they did end up going 1-2 versus BLG, but they got 9-0'd by BLG in practice. So like they probably throughout the tournament, it's not like last year where they had really high scrim win rate where they're like, oh, we feel like we're a really good team. We just weren't able to show up. They actually do feel like they are a worse team than these teams that are beating them. And maybe they're showing up on stage and kind of clutching it out and they're finding good opportunities and they're able to make it look like a 1-2. But if you look at how the BLG series went versus G2, it always felt like BLG is like playing the map the way they want to play. They're like creating like advantages from themselves that are just naturally happening. So when the game is static, it's like the Asian teams are winning. And then G2 would like make a play to like even it out or like bring it back, or even in game 2 completely swing it into their favor. And then like, BLG is still like creeping up. So it's like you're constantly losing and then you're trying to just keep on making like outplays in order to, you just swing the game into your favor. And that's just not a good way to play. Like you just end up generally losing when you have to consistently do this versus top teams. And I think a lot of it isn't based off pure laning. It used to always feel like that because the laners just from the East were just so much better that you were just constantly losing lane. At now it feels like the laning is actually better and it's more of these like team decisions. And one thing that G2 was really bad at the entire year, or at least one thing that was really evident to them when they started scrimming internationally, was how bad they were in lane swaps, right? Like that was something that they've said in interviews, that their lane swaps weren't good. And if you see when they played against TL, they were losing like every game to TL as soon as TL landed, and over time they got better. And a lot of like coming up with these strategies when it comes to lane swaps, a lot of this is about timing on because your AD carry is just going to be slow stacking the wave. Your mid laner is just going to be mid. It's about like your support making the correct decision on like which lane to leech, or am I going to stay bot, or like you're going to go mid. It depends on where everyone starts in the game, and then the jungle hitting the timing together. And it's like if you're not able to play these lane swap situations, a lot of it is going to come down to like your jungle and support not being on the same page, because your jungle and support generally are the ones that should be like leading the lane swap. Like, you know, the AD carry is doing his own thing, like stacking the wave, and then your support is like, hey, we're going to be diving on this wave. You can clear like one more camp and you can dive, and it's up to the jungler to like hit the timing. So I just feel like they probably struggled with that for the majority of the year, and that's the reason for it. I also think in 2022 they were just a way different team, so the pieces that they needed were different. So I don't think that it's like, oh, you still had BB and Caps in 2022. So, you know, when you added this rookie jungler and then you brought back Mikyx and Hansama, like you had a different interpretation of who your players are. I think Broken Blade is a much different player now than he was in 2022. Absolutely. And that changes the type of pieces that you need now.
So it seems like the consensus is you get a lane-focused support. You get a jungler who's going to be a much bigger shot calling voice and confident in what they want on the macro stage. Labrov is one. What are we thinking? All right, Labrov and the KC Blue. Skumon. Is there anyone else? Are there other options there that come to mind? Because, you know, I'm not trying to nuke the segment by tilting you off the planet, but what more could an AD carry want from a support than a player who plays AD carry and maybe one of the best AD carries in the history of Europe? Okay. You know, got to meet up in Europe and be like, hey, Hans, you've been doing pretty good. I've been learning some things from the Korean way. And having Reckless come to G2. Okay, all right.
It's finally happening after all these years. He's not in prison from Fnatic and unable to go anymore. I mean, look, I don't know if that would like harsh the vibes of the team at all. But
it's not happening.
I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, there, unfortunately, like a lot of the theoretical transfers that you would want to see potentially, like Razork on this roster, like he's in contract hell with Fnatic until 2026. So that's just not going to happen. Inspired is his real love is North America now, so he's not going anywhere. That's right. And so where do you go after that? Like, I just don't think they have an option at jungler, unfortunately for them, without paying a massive buyout to Fnatic, right? That is going to be good enough for them. And so maybe you take a swing at a rookie. But again, like, it's not about... My concern is not that this can't work. My question is, on what timeline can it work? And is this the best thing? Because ultimately, G2 boils down to Caps. And if Caps is at the end of his career, if this is the last hurrah of Caps over the next 1 to 2 years, it's a gamble. It's a big gamble to put a rookie jungler in this position, right? It's a big gamble to eliminate some of the X factor that has been on your roster, the wild card tendencies that Mikyx has. Because you can think whatever you want about Mikyx, but factually, he is a massive meta disruptor at these tournaments. It was the Lissandra support last year. It was the Poppy support at MSI, right? He has really set the pace on a lot of these champions, and he has gotten a lot of wins with his weird champion pool and his kind of unconventional play style. And so my question is, does a standard support, a more standard support player, put G2 in a position where now they can like win a Worlds or be in a finals? And I don't know if that's true, right? Because it's not like the Asian teams are getting worse, guys. In fact, over the last couple of years, what we've seen the Asian teams do is just stack up super teams. Whether it was JDG last year or Genji this year, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard.
I mean, Weibo, like, even though they're fourth seed, like, they're effectively like a super team. Like, that is like what they're trying to build. Like, it's not like these players have some like inherent synergy. I mean, the way that it was built was like Xiaohu was the best pickup. Like, seeing Xiaohu originally off RNG just was crazy. It was like, what the fuck? This guy's no longer on RNG anymore. I mean, Tarzan, like, bringing him in, they just tried to get the best jungler possible. Breathe is somebody who peaked really high. And what I've noticed in LPL is if somebody has peaked high before, they generally will have more opportunities to like show themselves. It's kind of the same in LCK where players just that have shown really high levels will get more of a pass, where I feel like in the West it's like, oh, this guy's just shit now, like he's not worth it if you have like a bad year. The idea of bringing in that whole team, I mean, that is like a team that's not formed based off, we're trying to get pieces that really fit what our team wants to do. The way that they're putting this team together is, what is the best player on paper that we can sign? Like, what player do we think is just the best player? They don't care about like fit, any of that. It's just, we just need the best player we can get.
Yeah, honestly, you look down all 4 teams on the LCK that made it to Worlds. You have to go to D+ and see, okay, they gave the shot to Lucid, and Lucid proved himself.
They still have 2 world champions.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like all 4 teams from the LCK, pretty stacked until you get to D+, where it's like, okay, well, here's our stacked players, and we'll give the chance to Lucid, and then Kellen / Moham.
So does Team Liquid technically, but.
In the chat for our friends watching, let us know who you want to see in those 2 slots here for G2, as it looks like. And again, they can always resign. G2 has the luxury of being the biggest and the best in the West, right? Like,
no, they can't resign. You mean like resign Mikyx and Yike?
They could resign Mikyx.
No,
maybe not Yike.
You cannot resign players after you let them explore buyout. No, like that is like you're cutting them from the team. Like it just is what it is.
Well, let us know who you want to see there for G2 next split.